Are we live?
We are, yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Graves. Hello, everyone. I am Chris Gazdick, and he is Mr. Craig Graves. I am a mental health and substance abuse therapist, and he is an unbeatable mind coach. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. I've got a book coming out soon. I always like to mention that, Rediscovering Emotions and Becoming Your Best Self. Craig, I was tripped out actually not too long ago. That's actually like, did you catch my Facebook post on all that?
Yeah, I saw that. That's pretty cool.
Why.
Yeah.
That freaked me out. I'm not going to lie. I was like, it's on Goodreads? Like, wait, who does that?
Yeah,
like,
I'm happy for you, man. That's really cool.
It was truly strange. Y'all don't know this, but I'm actually staring at my editor yet. We have a repeat offender on the show. More on that shortly. We welcome you through A Therapist's Eyes, the podcast, to see the world through the lens of a therapist and a coach, being aware it's not the delivery of therapy services in any way. Check out the website through atherapisteyes.com, where you can get full show transcriptions. I said it right that time, Neil. You happy? He's smiling like, good job, Chris. That's like only the third time you've done it. This is the human emotional experience. Craig, shall we figure this thing out together?
I hope so, man.
All right. We got a good one tonight. Welcome back, Miss Cortney and Mr. Marc. How are y'all doing?
We're doing well, thanks.
Doing good. Glad to be here.
Cool. We have introduced them before, Craig. You remember how they talked about the coronavirus, their corona thing?
Yeah, I remember.
They talked about the COVID and what's happening in marriage. And we gave the audience a little teaser, didn't we, guys? In
fact, it was more of a you told us to kind of keep our past and our secret. So we did. So we're ready here to spill the beans.
Secrets no more.
This is Cortney and Marc Donelson, married for 21 years. They have two kiddos, age 15 and 11. Both were adopted internationally. How cool is that? Speakers and trained marriage mentors through the Basic Idea Ministry based in Georgia. We facilitate small groups and weekend intensives for couples at all stages of marriage. I think you said you're still doing that. Is that put on hold by the COVID or whatnot?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much, right?
Yeah. It's tough these days.
From the engaged couples to the in-crisis couples. And I got to tell you, Craig, this lady right here, sorry, Mark, but this lady right here is the best editor ever.
I tell you, if she edited your work, I'm thinking you might be right.
You got to come up with some new jokes. You said that the last time too, man.
Yeah, I mean, I edit those Facebook posts and Instagram posts. It's tough work, Cortney. I tell you, I have mad respect for you.
In Vosum editing, she does ghostwriting. She edited documents and books alike. Really, she makes your stuff come through. And I do. I want to publicly, thank you and compliment you again, Courtney, because I mean that process of going through it was crazy. It's weird. It's an emotionally weird reality, and you're so calming and helpful through that. I just, I keep on thanking you because you did such a good job. I was very appreciative.
Oh, well, you're welcome. I love doing it.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what, man, I got a current event. You guys can pop in and comment about this as well before we kind of get into the topic. Oh man, how about that for a big topic, right? Craig, how did Cortney forgive a sex addict? Forgiveness in marriage. Wow. Right. Like, wow. That's going to be an interesting topic. But before we kind of go into all of that and what happened, check this current event out, guys. Marc and Cortney, right? Like, how about this title? How COVID-19 might increase risk of cognitive decline. Have you heard anything like that?
I haven't heard anything about that. There's so much we don't know yet, though. It's the first I've heard of it.
Yeah. Have y'all heard of anything like that, Marc?
We haven't heard of anything. And so is the article saying that having COVID decreases mental cognitive decline, or just the environment decreases? Because
it's the zombie apocalypse. It's going to make us all crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I feel like we're not thinking as clearly as we did, 12 months ago.
Yeah. Right, I know, in a lot of ways. No, listen to some of this. I had Neil kind of go through, because I didn't have time. I just read the whole article, and I was absolutely fascinated. So this is a lady named Natalie C. Tronson. And Craig, the reason why I wanted to do this is current events, because, I have been absolutely fascinated with neuroscience. I told you that Neil deGrasse Tyson
Oh yeah.
Right. I respect his brain. I respect his science. His intellect is just amazing to me. And he answered a question on his Star Talk podcast, what is the most interesting and new age, biggest development, however way you want to put it, science topic in question today? He says neurology. What's going on in our brains? And you remember Gwen Wilde?
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff. Well, listen to what she's saying about COVID-19. It is clear that from many patients suffering from COVID-19 exhibit neurological symptoms from loss of smell to delirium to an increased risk of stroke. And she goes on, I am a neuroscientist specializing in how memories are formed, the role of immune cells in the brain, and how memory is persistently disrupted after illness and immune activation. As I survey the emerging scientific literature, my question is, will there be a COVID-19 related wave of memory deficits, cognitive decline, and dementia cases in the future? Again, a lot of that is mental health. The brain and the body are absolutely combined together, right?
Yeah.
So it recently became clear that the neuroimmune cells that sit at the connections between the brain cells, synapses, which provide energy to and minute quantities of inflammatory signals, are essential for the normal memory formation. Unfortunately, this also provides a way in which illnesses like COVID-19 can cause both acute neurological symptoms and long-lasting issues in the brain. During illness and inflammation, the specialized immune cells in the brain became activated, spewing vast quantities of inflammatory signals and modifying how they communicate with neurons. I won't go on further. We'll have the article on the show notes, but that was fascinating to me as far as how that affects your emotions, how that affects the way that you're feeling and depression. And we know people have reported loss of taste and weird stuff like that with this thing.
Yeah, I think the loss of smell and taste is well documented, but has she got any science behind that, or is she just speculating that possibly something could happen?
I don't know, man. She says that she's a neuroscientist specializing in how memories are formed and whatnot. It's a good question. I understand your question.
Yeah.
I think it's also new we're learning.
Well, I was going to say, it's something, the disease is what, as far as we know, it came around last October, November. There can't be any data that says that there's an increased risk of cognitive decline yet. I mean, I'm no researcher. You guys are a lot smarter than I am, but it just seems weird to me.
Yeah, it's, I think we're going to be learning a lot as we go along, for sure. You guys have any comments, or shall we buzz on?
It's up to you. We can move on if you want.
Buzz on.
Let's buzz on. She has written a story named Clay Jar Cracked. Craig, I got to tell you, and honestly, Courtney, my hat's off to you, and Mark, you as well. Craig, I don't know if you've had a chance to read this yet, have you?
I have not. I apologize, but I have not. It's
a powerful, real, genuine, raw, emotional story that I am told Miss Donelson has a positive end. And I'm anxious to hear about that as we get through the yuck, the pain. I think I'll tell you from the get-go. Somewhere in my notes I had said this, but it comes up to me now and seems to fit in introducing your story. I have really begun to believe that people are tuning into this story, forgiveness in marriage, because it is such a required necessity, because people get to their worst spot emotionally. I feel like people become the most vulnerable. In your book, you talk about being on the floor, more than once in a very genuine and powerful way. And I feel like people I see, and I've experienced my own deep pain in marriage at times. This is such a thing that's so close to our heart. I see people become suicidal at this time. Like, what I'm trying to say is this is one of the big mental health hitters in what we're dealing with when a marriage goes south. Mm-hmm. Right? So I set that up because, again, I don't mind foreshadowing. We had a positive outcome. We want to figure out what happened, how you got through that, so we can get, hopefully, at some point there, right?
Right.
So what is a clay jar cracked? What happened? Let's get in a little bit to the story. You guys game?
We're game.
Sure.
Yeah. I have to give props here to Marc for being so willing over the years to continuously share this story. I mean, it's not easy to open your darkest moments to the world. And
I know, right?
yeah, and he's done it over and over. So, and he's going to do it right now again. So,
So here we go.
Yeah, absolutely. There we go. I again, too, and I'm glad I remembered to set this up this way. These two shows, the one we did before you was about letting go. It's a very powerfully cool process that Miss Janice Booth, and thank you again, Miss Janice, if you're still out there listening to share her stories of what she did. And these two shows really are following up from our show that we did on racism. We spent a part 1 and part 2 talking about our national experiences with racism. And I thought, what better way to kind of go. And Craig, I'm sorry again, by the way, we came out of our break and you're like, we're going to hit easy issues. We're going to hit simple topics. We're going to cruise, right? Look at what we've done. Racism, personal stories of letting go. Now we're hitting marriage and fair and challenges of forgiveness. We didn't start out easy, but that's by design, guys. That's by design, because we need to deal with these things, which is what I get excited about doing on our show. So just to start you out a little bit, you talked about the book not being about a story of marriage and betrayal and forgiveness, but rather the power of prayer and digging into the Bible and, and listening to God, quote unquote, no matter what. That came through in a lot of your stories. So how do we start? What happened?
Yeah, so I guess I'll kind of give the background, because without the background, it's a discussion about forgiveness. So there's obviously something that needs to be forgiven, and that's where I come in. And so really, Cortney and I have been married for 13 years. When basically I basically let her know that up until that point in our marriage, there was a whole side to me that she didn't know about, that I had hidden from her very purposefully and very carefully, and really it boiled down to being addicted to pornography, and it started there and then led to more than one affair, and really in Christian, I mean, it's, as I went through my counseling, I mean, it's a pretty standard kind of addiction story. There were lies that I believed about myself, and things that, one of the things that I still work on is, trusting that feelings are good things. I spent a lot of my life thinking my way through life. And so when I would have, negative feelings, or I would get stressed, I didn't know what to do with those feelings. So I would look for, any way to escape. And while some people run to substance abuse or certain things, I had some things growing up that kind of pushed me towards pornography addiction. And it started slowly. And after years and years and years, it grew to the point where, it was difficult to go more than 48 hours without looking at something. And, with the internet, it was, so easy to find.
It's exploded.
Yeah. I mean, you can do it whenever you want. And I had no problem finding anything. And then, one day I, was out running one night and just felt this voice tell me, hey, you know what? Hey, bud, this is the time. You need to go home and come clean and tell Court. To which I thought, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard.
Right. What am I thinking?
I don't know whose voice that is, but you're an idiot. That.
So that's the way it happened like that for you, man? So you just kind of going along with addiction, going along with all the things that because, I don't know if you know this, Marc, but we've had this as a topic on our show. I referenced the audience to, Joshua Shea, and we've talked about addiction, once or twice, Craig, right? And the sexual applications of this is part of what we talk about as the 4 process addictions: eating addictions, gambling addictions, sex addictions, and oh my God, brain fart. What's the 4th one? Eating, gambling, sex. Oh, and online video gaming addictions. And so, yeah, you say a standard story of addiction. That's a kind of a funny statement. I understand what you mean,
Yeah.
but it's a lot there, and it's fascinating to me, as you just put it there, that everyone knows Uncle Bob who just decided to put the beer down and never drank beer again, right? I mean, I don't understand that in my clinical brain. I know it happens because there's a lot of process and relapse and struggle that a lot of times goes into there. So if you don't mind me asking, how long are you clean?
So we've been married 21 years. So that was 8 years ago.
So you're 8 years clean?
Yeah. And
Oh man, that's awesome. Congratulations. That's absolutely fantastically sweet.
yeah. And I mean, it took, it was a process to get through. I mean, it was, a couple of years of counseling and retraining my brain into, what's healthy, what's normal, what's true, what's not true. Learning how to, trust emotions and not run and be scared for them, and being able to lean into negative emotions instead of escaping. And so it was, I think that's one of the things that we've seen through couples that we've worked with is, that fear to really dive in. And one of the things that really encouraged me early on when, my life was blowing up, I was fully expecting to never see my wife again, never see my kids again when I came out of this. But the therapist I was working with, he told me, look, yes, you had some things that kind of pushed you down this road, but your decisions brought you here. And to me, that was, well, it wasn't fun to hear. It was very encouraging to hear, because it also meant that my decisions can pull me out of this.
Right.
So,
right.
Hey, I'm a complete victim, and like, it's out of my control. There are active things that I can do, and steps I can take. They're not going to be easy. They're not going to be fun.
And just a plug for anybody listening out there that is or knows any form of addiction, pot, pills, drugs, alcohol, doesn't matter. You reach out, get help. Like, you do not be alone with addiction, because that will be a death knell. We know that in the substance abuse field. But, it's interesting. I wanted to comment again too, Mark. You said, the story of addiction is like other stories of addiction. It is. But, there's a little bit of a different flavor with sex addiction yet. I think we still got a whole lot of, stigmas and stereotypes and weirdness around it. And I'll tell you one that happened to me just in this moment a few moments ago that I never even thought of before, but that I wanted to go back and kind of correct. Because I asked you a question. How long have you been clean? Now, somebody who's not in the substance abuse field might be listening to this as a marriage show about forgiveness, which is exactly what it is. But I ask you that question, you're like, oh yeah, well, because, Craig, porn's dirty. Sex addiction's dirty. So that's weird. He asked him if he's clean. That's like condescending. That's awful. That's weird. I never thought about it, because when I'm talking to somebody who's an alcoholic, that's the term that you use. But people with sex addiction, even, like, you could think of that like in sort of a weird, funky way, right? And it's a weird thought to me.
Yeah.
It could, and I mean, I'll talk to the friends, or as I'm sharing my story with people, I'll say, I've been sober 8 years, and immediately they go to, oh wait, you're an alcoholic too? No, like, sober is not alcohol, clean is not porn. Like, it's just sober from the addiction. So yeah, I mean, it's weird the way we associate words with different things.
Right.
So, Mark, let me ask you something. You said you were out running and heard a voice.
Yeah.
So that was just out of the blue? Were you struggling with bringing this out in the open, and this voice culminated it, or did it just hit you?
So I was, I was at a point where, so throughout the entire addiction and my entire life, one of the things that really identified me was my faith. And so this whole time I had this hidden life. We were going to church, we were reading Bible studies, and I was starting to get a little frustrated with God that, I saw Court doing all this cool stuff with her faith, and I wasn't doing anything. And I kind of was having that with God a little bit to say, hey, why aren't you putting things in my path to do when instead, why her and not me?
Be careful when you ask that question, Craig.
and so, a week later, so I'm out on this run and, heard this voice say, hey, this is the time, you need to come clean. And so for the next, the whole run home, I'm like, all right, what little tiny nugget of truth or even half truth can I share to get this voice to shut up and still be able to, not, keep my secrets or my secret. And, and really that night started probably a 3-week, slow reveal process of Court asking questions. And for the first time, the questions were questions that I couldn't figure out a way to dodge, or I couldn't figure out a way to spin or tell half truths. And eventually over that time, I mean, everything came out. And a month or two later, through support groups, I can remember being outside, again, having it out with God, saying, God, if this is such a big problem in the world, why isn't anybody talking about it?
Right.
And it was that moment. As soon as those words came out, I'm like, oh, please let me pull those back in, because
yeah.
I got to say, I think you said that you didn't expect to see your wife again after telling her that. I admire your faith in doing what that voice told you to do anyway.
Well, yeah, and again, my plan was not to come home and say, all right, hey, sweetie, we have to talk. I got a whole bunch of, really, I was looking for the smallest nugget that I could share that in some way I could spin to make me look good.
And, Mark, I'm glad you put it that way, because I really do want to throw in there, whether it be vis-a-vis, now be careful here. I don't mean necessarily details. We did a show on recovering from the affair. Craig, I don't know if you remember that, but I would refer the listener to that. That's a big part of this, because you do want to be careful about being detail oriented. In your book, Cortney, you ask about I want to know everything. I want to know every detail. I want to know. That's actually traumatizing. That's not what I'm talking about here when I say one of the great level mistakes people make, especially with sex addiction reveals, is they really do that small, minimal nugget reveal that you're talking about, Mark. And then they get pushed a week later, a month later, and they'll pop out another one. But that's it, nothing else. And then a week later, a couple months later, they get pushed and pushed and pushed, and then they pop out a third. And then a month or two, and a fourth, and a fifth, and this onward process goes on. The reason why I say this is because that's a real life experience, Craig, that I experienced before I knew what sex addiction was early in my career, and it was horrifying. It was really so not the way to go. So just I didn't plan that, but I wanted to highlight that, Mark. That's important.
And that's exactly what happened here, except it was really over,
condensed.
Once I knew I was completely trapped, and there was no way around this, it was either get in my car and drive away and never see anyone again, or, all right, the big stuff is about to come out. The big stuff came out a little bit every day for over a 9-day period. And by the end, it was, look, this is, and every time Court said, all right, just tell me everything. Just I don't want to be surprised anymore. Just tell me everything. And I just couldn't make myself do it. Because one, I had to admit to myself that, this was you. This wasn't this other Mark somewhere. I had to reconcile that this was actually me, and I was hurting the person that I love the most in this world. And I never, that was never the intention. That was never my desire, but it's what happened. So it took me a while to wrestle with it, to figure out, all right, I need to keep talking here.
Right. So this is about forgiveness. How did you forgive Cortney? Now that's a joke, sort of, but it's foreshadowing. It's not really a joke. Cortney, what do you do? Take it from here. Like, and y'all need to read this Revelation process. It's such a well-written story book. And so far as what you lived, I mean, Cortney, what'd you do with all this? How'd you manage this? What, the 9 days, I mean, what are we dealing with here on your end?
Yeah, well, I get this question a lot because as soon as Marc shares that second side of him, everyone then turns to me wondering why I'm still standing next to him with a ring on my finger, right? So, and certainly in those 9 days, I did not believe that we would be where we are today. So what happened was, as Marc said, it was a complete surprise. There were no red flags. I didn't catch him. There was no indication. And so my world was literally kind of torn apart in an instant, and then kept being torn apart for those 9 days. So luckily, like Marc, I had a very strong faith, and I don't know that I can talk about this level of forgiveness that's required without, referencing the amount of faith it took, because you have to believe in something bigger than yourself in order to move away from the pain enough and to give the pain away, because you don't want to keep carrying it. That's that's what weighs you down. And so it takes a measure of humility that without my faith, I wouldn't have. I am no saint. I am no superwoman. I am no, magician. And the only way I can explain having the humility to say, there's a bigger picture here. It's not all about me. And, forgiveness is kind of critical here, is because I, have a relationship with God. So.
And one of the things that Cortney said early on in our recovery process, or even in my reveal process, she looked at me and said, look, when we got married, I said, I would love you in sickness and in health. And until I know more about what you've done and if this is an addiction, I'm going to look at this as a sickness, which was about the last thing I was expecting to hear. But you let me know, like, hey, just because you didn't hold up your end of the vows doesn't mean that I'm not going to hold up mine. And so she had that type of perspective early on, that was, again, amazing to me, because I don't know that would have been my reaction if the shoe was on the other foot.
Yeah, that would have been your reaction. What do you mean that? Say more about that.
I mean, if Court had come to me and told me everything that I had told her, and she was the addict, I don't know that I would have had the patience,
grace,
and the grace and the clarity of thought to say, you know what, this might be a sickness, and I told you I would love you till we die, in sickness and in health, in that sense.
Absolutely. And I think I want to point out for our listening audience what I see all over the place when I'm dealing with these issues and whatnot, or just even in my personal life, and times that we've struggled, and the realities that we all deal with human beings, right? Cortney, and I read your book, up until the ends part. Like I did want to point that out because I wanted to get that fresh directly from you for this show. But that doesn't happen immediately, people. Like we're not talking about, Craig, you ever see Mama on the news, Channel 9, and the kid gets shot and he's lying dead on the street, and the very next day they're interviewing a woman, and the woman or maybe a guy's like sitting there saying, well, I forgive the man who did this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Listen, forgiveness happens in pieces. Just like I said on last show, remember I was talking about letting go happens in pieces? Well, I applied that to this too, which by the way, again, listening audience, we did a show on racism, part 1 and part 2. We did something about letting go last week. Do you hear the follow through insofar as forgiveness this week? Like these things all tie together. And that's the reason why I kind of chose to do things this way, because you do this in pieces. You do this in steps. This is not like an event, right? Courtney, you correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I liken it to peeling an onion. So you take off one layer and it makes you cry, and then you take off another layer and it makes you cry, and then you finally, after dozens of layers and lots of tears, you finally hit, the core, and you're done.
It's messy.
It's very messy, but it also, I think it encompasses the whole, like your whole being. Like if you just forgive with words, that is surface level, and that isn't true forgiveness. If you think you've forgiven, but you haven't spoken it, you haven't felt it, you haven't in your spirit, understood that the baggage of the pain is gone, and you release all of your anger, then you haven't forgiven either. It wasn't until, it was a good year almost before I was able to fully forgive Marc and feel that weight lifted, and, not want any type of revenge or harbor any bitterness. It was a long process.
You said a full year?
Almost, yeah.
Yeah. Is it possible that still process is happening?
No, I don't think for this situation, no. Of course, on a daily basis, we have to forgive our spouses.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But for this situation, no, I don't, like, I'm not the paranoid wife. I'm not the checking up. I'm not the bitter. I don't hold it over him and say, do you remember when? And
Chapter whatnot. I'm not the co-addict.
Yeah.
Right.
I saw that.
I did. Yeah. And what I mean by that is, and if not for you, I think that it's probably possible to do a super thorough job and whatnot, but also, for fleeting moments, when you have a before and after life event, it is very normal, Craig, to kind of go in through the process again and again and again and again and again, because our human bodies and our amygdala and our subconscious, our brain, our neurology, if you will, we pull things back. That's normal. So it is, for people out there that are saying like, oh, well, I thought you forgave me, 3 years ago. Why are you bringing this back up again? Well, the very first time you used words, it might have been, superficial in the first step, but that's a step, and then another step, and then another step, and another step. And you might review this 15 years later. Hopefully by that point, it's super snappy. You know what I'm saying? Very, very quick. But does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Especially if there are, triggering events, thoughts, memories, things like that come up, or, especially with addiction, it's not uncommon to, regress or things like that. So
right.
I'm sorry.
What's that, Courtney?
You would have to re-forgive in those instances, I would think, and go through the process again.
Re-forgive is a good word. Yeah. What's that, Craig?
I'm just going to say, so do those bad memories still come up? Do you still? I know you're not checking up, and you're not. I heard you say those things, but do those bad memories still ever surface?
No, they don't. It's really strange because I had to. There was a whole room full of people I had to forgive. Right? It wasn't just Marc. There were lots of people. The other women. Stuff from his childhood. There was a lot of forgiveness happening.
When you hurt the most, you grow the most. I think that's a true reality.
Yeah. But I think I knew that I had reached that full forgiveness when over time, I can think about, these other women and not harbor any animosity at all. And it was at that point that I knew I had gone through every level of that onion.
Right. Peeled it all the way off. Yeah.
And I think, it was interesting. I was teaching a class years ago, and someone in the class, we were talking about forgiveness, and someone mentioned, mentioned still having those feelings, like memories come up and still feeling a little bit of anger, but she was convinced that she had gone through, a full forgiveness process. And after the class, after talking through it all, she realized that she hadn't because she was still harboring some resentment.
And that's okay, I think, is my message to the listener. I mean, that's normal, and that's, give yourself the grace to re-engage that. But go ahead, Craig.
Well, I was just going to say, you're the therapy guru, and I'm not. But
You're the coach
I would
guru.
argue that that what Cortney's found is true forgiveness. If she's still bringing this stuff up 3, 4, 5 years later, there's still something going on there, and maybe complete forgiveness has not been given.
Yeah, I think what I would say, Craig, is the intensity level. I mean, as a matter of fact, here's a good way to instill this. I teach this in my therapy rooms often. Oftentimes people will ask, what is true forgiveness? I get the question, what is a resolved emotion? And I actually have this in my book because I've used it as a staple for a very, very long time. A truly resolved emotion is one not resolved where you feel the same intensity now as when it first happened. That's like obvious. Okay. But I would also submit that it's probably equally unresolved if you feel like no emotion connected to when you reflect and whatnot, just because you compartmentalize that, bag that up, and it's gone.
Yeah.
True forgiveness, if you will, or a resolved emotion is a gradual decline. Maybe it's quick decline over a month or so, or a few, maybe it's a year, maybe it's 5. What we want to see is a gradual decline in intensity of emotion so that you get to a point that it's really, really small.
Yeah.
Almost maybe even non-noticeable. Courtney, does that make sense with what you're describing?
It makes perfect sense. I just lost my train of thought.
Okay. It'll come back. The gradual decline of emotional experience with intensity on that.
I can still put myself in the past, in those moments that hurt the worst, and I can still feel all of that emotion. The difference is, because I have forgiven Mark, it's not directed negatively towards him. It's just emotion for the experience and trauma we went through together, or I went through on my own, but it's not a bitterness or anger towards him for causing it, so to speak.
Courtney, if you don't mind, what did that year look like? You said it took a year.
Yeah.
What kind of emotions? Was there anger, resentment? I mean, what was going on during that year, and how did you overcome all that?
Betrayal, insecurity, fears, and confusions, and depressions, and sadness, and gleeful, and right?
Roller coaster ride. I mean, I went from, in minutes, I could go from anger to despair to forgetting exactly what I was supposed to be doing in that moment, and not living my life or functioning even on a daily basis, to, compartmentalizing, and it was all over the place. In fact, we do not condone this or recommend it or anything like that. But I was
Mark's looking around like,
what's coming right here.
I was so angry in the beginning. There was, I guess, a moment where in my anger, I actually hit Mark in the arm. And I didn't remember doing it. And the next day I saw a bruise on his arm. I said, "What'd you do? Hit yourself, or where'd you get that, or something?" And he stared at me like, "Do you not know?"
Do you not remember? Wow, really?
I mean,
this is messy.
Yeah.
There is no ideal, perfect way to go through this process. Craig, this is a therapy experience, and it's not out of a textbook. You don't sit here and go, okay, let's say step 1, step 2, and step 3, and step 4. I could write a cool blog. I've seen people go through this, and I know people love blogs of like, the 5 steps to recovering your marriage or whatever. Come on, man. It goes up and down. It's messy. It's emotional. It's a lot of gray, and you're not going to be perfect going through it. So if that's the only thing you did, ma'am, and you didn't like down 5 gallons of alcohol a night for a few weeks, okay, you're doing all right. Hit it,
And so at the time while we were going through this, our oldest was 5 at the time. And we were talking with him probably, I don't know, a few months ago. And somehow the conversation came up of, when have you really seen mom and dad upset at each other, or really angry at each other? And he picked some innocuous thing that had happened 6 months ago, like like the time that dad left the ice cream out or something and mom lost it, or vice versa. Like, if that's what you remember us being angry about, like we protected you pretty well. Like we
Yeah.
kind of get behind closed doors pretty well, because that's not
Yeah.
even close to what that anger was from 8 to 10 years ago.
Well, you know what's funny, and I apologize. I was the one that snapped my fingers for the listening audience, because sometimes it was a whole. I thought you were going in a different direction, and the reality of it is, kids, particularly if they're a little older than 3, 2, 4, even 5 or whatever, people, they can relive this stuff too. So it's interesting. You picked up on them. They're just not on this at all.
So yeah, I mean, like they know the story. I mean, we've shared it with them, but they don't remember. They don't remember the tension in the house, and they don't remember, mom and dad not talking to each other,
or not sleeping in the same room.
That there were many nights where I would, after the kids went to bed, I'd sleep on the couch, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'd set my alarm and I'd get back in our bed, because we didn't want the kids to know that there was any issues going on. But anyway, so that's so it's just interesting when you talk about that anger and some of the emotions that went on. It was definitely there, but it's not it was never a linear process. I mean, it was always, every time I thought I was out of the the fire for a day or two, and then we're right back into it.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, Marc, like how you kind of, because, we're not talking about the addiction part of the side of it tonight, but, insofar as the marriage component, as she's going through this, we haven't talked too much about the characteristic of betrayal, and we haven't talked about the characteristics of forgiveness and how that operates. And we've talked a lot about the messy emotions and stuff, but as she's going through this on her side over that process, like, what are you doing on your side, particularly recovery based, and your community and your what, there's a whole other side of it, which is why I asked you, how did you forgive Cortney?
Yeah, so it's a weird dynamic, because before she knew anything, I part of me was miserable, because I was battling this double life, and then once I let that out and let that secret out, then part of me is so relieved,
Right.
So almost so happy that, all right, I'm finally on the right path, I'm finally doing the right thing. So while I'm trying to be proud of myself, like, everyone else in the world hates me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and you brought up support groups. I mean, my therapist recommended a specific support group, and it was great, because it was the one place that I could go to each week that the people got it, the people understood, where we were all in the same place together, and so we could be happy for our successes, even when we realized that that even starting down that road was causing pain to other people. So, and as far as the betrayal goes, that was probably the worst part of it, because I had, like I said before, I had hurt the person that I never wanted to hurt. In fact, a lot of the reason why I didn't say anything sooner was because in my mind, I was protecting her. I didn't want to hurt her, so I'm not going to tell her. If she doesn't know, she can't get hurt.
Quote unquote, in my mind, right?
Exactly. Which just prolonged everything.
And of course, yeah, from my perspective, when someone that close to you, when your spouse betrays you, I mean, that's the person closest to you on this planet. That's a deep, deep hurt.
Yeah.
I would argue is not just, it's not just mental, it's not just emotional, it's physical, it's spiritual. It cuts to the core of who you are. And so I think it was harder to work through the process of forgiving Marc than it was forgiving everyone else.
It's funny that you say that. We're perfectly in step, Courtney, as it seems like we usually are. Betrayal and the definition, what it is. I sometimes I'll do some Google hits just to back myself up on what I'm thinking about and where I kind of want to try to accomplish and stuff to kind of help people that are in our listening audience, grow from this stuff, right? Betrayal is the breaking or violation of presumptive contract, trust, or confidence that produces moral or psychological conflict within a relationship amongst individuals, between organizations, or between individuals and organizations. That was actually Wikipedia. Because the other definition that I found said betrayal is the act of betraying another.
I saw that.
That was literally,
what is
you
that?
saw that?
Right,
What is that?
I just saw it on the notes.
It gets better. Listen to this. Vocabulary.com has several. Deliver to an enemy by treachery or disappointment. Prove undependable to. Abandon. Forsake. Cause someone to believe in untruth. Give away information about someone. Reveal unintentionally. Be sexual unfaithful to one's partner in marriage. That they had like several definitions of betrayal. And I looked at that and I was like, wait a minute, man. What is truly the definition of betrayal? Like, can we even define that experience? Like, I think people have a hard time of giving a true definition of the simple word love.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I propose to you a proposition. Is betrayal defined as the opposite of love? I don't know. These are just pondering thoughts because it's a visceral to the core experience, isn't it, Courtney? Like, and Mark, you've been betrayed at times, I'm sure, in life as well. Like, this is a weird thing to wrangle with, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you can't really talk about forgiveness without talking about trust. I mean, people ask all the time after that kind of betrayal, especially over that many years, and then how do you ever trust Mark again?
Right.
I mean, that's a lot. And my answer, which may sound jaded or sad or whatever, is, well, I don't completely trust him 100%. And
Nor should you any human being.
Exactly. And that's my point, is that we're all human. And, there are times I don't trust myself to make good decisions.
Right.
So, we're all going to walk through difficult times. We're all going to make really poor choices. But what I do trust, again, is God, is my faith. And I trust God with Mark, so that every day I wake up, I choose not to be that bitter, unforgiving spouse. And he wakes up and chooses, makes his choices. And I just have to trust that no matter what, we're going to be okay. Whether, mistakes are made, we're together, we're divorced, no matter what happens in this world, I have a creator that I trust 100%. But as far as daily trust, I mean, you should trust your spouse on a daily basis to have a good relationship with them. And so,
yeah, I oftentimes think of it as a scale of 1 to 100. People like to think, I trust you or I don't trust you. All right, Craig, I trust you that you're going to be here on Thursdays when we record. Right. And Neil, if he starts screwing that up, you know what? I don't trust him anymore, Neil. Let's get somebody else because I don't trust him. That's the way we think of it in that simplistic of term. It's like, no, I trust on a scale of 1 to 100. 100 is absolutely solid. And you're right. I ain't got anybody of that with God. And I'm going to be honest with the audience. I've shared before. I'm not a Christian counselor, but I'm a Christian on my own journey, and I do counseling. I wish I trusted God on 100. I do. I don't. It's hard, man.
it is hard.
It's terribly hard. But I'm dang sure not going to be on a scale of 95 or even 90 with another human being. They have too many insecurities. They're too unstable. And you know what? Another aspect of this is I'd rather develop my faith relationship with a creator because they're a heck of a lot more trustworthy than my daggum self.
Right. Exactly.
Yep.
Right? God, self, spouse, children, family, friends, and then work. Order of priority generally accepted. We've talked about that on the show, Craig, right?
We have, yes.
Dynamic stuff. Wow. How you guys feeling? There's a therapy question. I know. I'm sorry for that. How do you feel?
I still don't do feelings well, Chris.
All right.
Well,
there's an emotional challenge here, Mark.
Let's
2 minutes on how you're really feeling, really.
dive a little deeper on the trust thing.
Oh, he's saving you.
Well, so Courtney, if what Chris is saying is true, trust is on a scale of 1 to 100. I'm sure when you found out this thing, your trust level went down to 0, probably, right? Or right there at number 1 or whatever. So how do you begin to build that back up to a higher level? And maybe it's never completely 100, like Chris said, but how do you start building it back?
That's a great question, because at every given day through that whole process in the beginning, I had to ask myself, do I leave today or do I stay? Because, things kept coming out. I didn't know how much more I could take. I didn't know if I would ever be able to trust Marc again to a level that I would want for a marriage. I mean, I had to keep asking myself, what kind of marriage am I working for? If I don't get there, what happens? And so, it took me seeing change, him being, compliant with, his therapy visits and things like that, but more so than just checking off boxes, because he read books, he went to the support groups, he did therapy, and that's great. You can check off the box. But what I saw that helped was a change in his ability to share his emotions. Like, all of a sudden, it wasn't just, I think this, I think that, or it wasn't just silence. It was, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling that. And when we could start communicating on that feelings level, then I could see the change that was happening as he was getting sober and going through his recovery. So that helped my trust level go up.
And I'm glad you went there in that way. And Marc, I do want to come back to you and put you on the spot a little bit. If it's okay. If it's not, we'll move again. But it's funny because I asked that question, and I know that it's a tough question. It's funny because I supervise or facilitate placements for physician assistants students. We had one on our show, if you remember, Craig. Yeah. And they asked me a question one day. They're like, Chris, one of them, they said, Chris, they said, you don't really ask that question. Like, how's the client feel? And I thought, wait a minute, man, I guess I don't very often. I get at it. I talk with people, and I'd like to compliment you again, Marc. You're tremendously engaged with this conversation, and Courtney complimented you earlier because it is absolutely courageous. Like, but I would like to ask you again, how are you feeling talking about this? Because this is tough.
Are you going to bill us for this hour?
I know, right? No. Sorry.
No, it's a fair question. And there's always some level of mixed emotions. When we get an opportunity to talk about it and to share our story, there's a level of excitement, because I feel like this is the story that we were given. It's not the story I want, but it's the story we have. So I feel like this, being able to speak to it is, it's exciting. It's fulfilling. On the other side, it's terrifying. Last night, we were sitting Court and I were sitting in the living room. I'm like, all right, like, what's the plan tomorrow? How open-ended is this going to be? What questions are going to be asked? Because usually when I share, I'm kind of in control. All right, I've got my script. This is what I'm going to say. So I can kind of control what's coming out, what's not. She's like, Marc, it's just a conversation. And it was, to be honest, it was freaking me out a little bit. I'm like,
yeah.
I don't know what's going to be asked. And so there's definitely some nerves, and it's still uncomfortable leading up to it. Usually once I get in the conversation and get in talking about it, it's
you get accustomed and whatnot. But listen, it's anytime you're doing something new, I love public speaking. There's always that energy about it. And I remember asking a colleague, one time, I'm like, I'm getting ready to play baseball. Let's play softball. It's time. He's into sports psychology. And I just popped him out a question, when I was several years ago. I'm like, is it normal to be anxious before you play a softball game? You know what he said to me? And Marc, what I would say to you when you're doing anything like this, anytime a conversation like that comes up, you don't go into it flat. Can you imagine if you're going into a softball game, you're just like, all right, man, I guess I'll try to get a hit, All right, I'm going to go on a podcast tomorrow. I guess, I don't know. I guess I'll just talk about it. You're going to feel energy about it. And that's like, for folks that are dealing in marriage at home and dealing with forgiveness and what, like that's normal.
Mm-hmm.
It's very messy again, but we push through it and we get through it and we go through it. You know, my favorite life quote right now, I've told you this. You remember, Craig? My favorite life quote from Winston Churchill.
Oh, I can't remember it.
When you're going through hell,
Keep going.
right? Just the next best step. You know, my pastor talks about that all the time. We're just guiding people for the next best step. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you guys: is this story part of your ministry to couples? I'm assuming so.
Yeah, it is. I usually give couples in our groups a copy of my book, but we share it up front because we also want to disarm couples who are going through their own crisis and just to understand, hey, we're not perfect. We're not here trying to give you all the best answers and teach you anything. We're just here alongside you as people who've gone through something really hard.
Yeah, I love that. People can relate to people who've gone through stuff. I mean, there's just no other way to put it. I remember a funny story I had in a church. So I was watching Joel. This has been probably over 20 years ago, but I was watching Joel Osteen, and he was talking about drug addiction and divorce. And he said, "How do I know? Because I've seen it." And I'm like, "You've seen it?" So then like 2 weeks later, I was in a small church here in Belmont, and the pastor said, I don't know what he was talking about, but he said, "And how do I know? Because I've been there." He said, "I'm the dirtiest person in this whole church." And I thought, wow, I can relate to this guy. This is my guy right here.
Yeah. I think it's funny how people look at therapists and think we don't struggle with any of this stuff. I mean, I've admitted, I think on the show before, Craig, I mean, you think I got this stuff down?
Well,
it's hard.
I always joke that all the therapists I know actually need a therapist. So that's,
it's not a joke. It's real. But Corey, I want to get back to something because I found this, and I mean, oh man, can we go 2 more hours, Craig? Do we always say that? And then we need to get to the end of the story and what you mean by that. But I had this on bold, Craig, on the show notes, if you notice. Powerful advice. Cortney, do you remember, in your story, the advice that you got from your friend? It was a particular point where you were struggling. Do I stay? Do I go? What is the deal? Do you remember what she said to you?
About love?
Yes. Yes. Well, it's hard because you love him.
Yeah.
And she went on, right?
Yeah.
She went on and she says, what you do is you go until you feel there's no more progress, and then you assess where you are and you decide if you can live with it.
Yeah.
And dude, that was now be careful, listening audience out there, because if you're trying to assess your partner, what kind of progress you make, now I don't see anything different. I don't see you doing anything. You can have that kind of thing going on. So don't get me wrong, but I really was struck by that. Can you talk about when you received that information, what that did in your mind? Because you're struggling. Should I stay? Should I go? And she says, well, you know what? It's hard because you love him. You go until you feel there's no more progress, and then you assess where you're at. You decide if you can live with it.
Yeah, no. Well, first I should mention that friend of mine, she's one of my best friends. She's also a counselor and therapist. So
well, yeah.
Those wise therapists.
What'd you say? You despise therapists?
No, those wise.
Oh, the one of the wise. Freudian. I heard Craig. I projected.
I don't know any wise ones. I'm just saying.
Hey, you told me I was a smart person when we were picking on me for being from West Virginia. What's the truth, man?
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it's funny. There are certain moments during my story that I can vividly remember. I can remember I was standing in our bedroom. I was pacing back and forth. Mark was not home, and I was struggling because I wasn't even sure if I still loved Mark at this point because I was so hurt. And, she said, no, you know what? You still love him. One, this can't change love. If love's not just a feeling. And so let's not be confused about love. And so he said, you do still love him. He's your husband. You have a lot of history together. And so what you want to do, she just encouraged me, work at it, do what you need to do. Go to the counseling, see if he, can make progress, see what his choices are. And then when you get to a point where there's no more forward progress, is that a marriage that you want to be in? And continue to fight for the marriage you want. But once that progress stops, is that a place that you want to stay for the rest of your life? And it was good advice because, first of all, I didn't remember that I loved Marc because I was in so much pain. And I needed to hear that. And then the second reason is because it helped me to fight for the marriage I wanted rather than settle for something. And I knew I always had options. And that's the big thing about going through this story is as soon as you feel like you have no options, then you lose hope. And part of forgiveness is a choice. And so you always have options. And so at that point, I chose to work as hard as I could and work towards forgiveness. And that's exactly what happened. So,
and another big thing to highlight that I know you wrote about, and I think, I don't know, we may have talked about, is just, you have to know you're going to be okay either way.
yeah.
The power and strength of encouraging and confidence in lack of insecurity, the strength and courage inside enables you to go, right?
Right. Yep. Whatever happened, I was going to be okay.
Right. That's hard to know when you're on the floor.
It's hard to know when you're talking marriage because you're so invested in that relationship and two become one, right? So sometimes you're not sure if you're going to be okay if their marriage doesn't last. But in the end, you are.
So how do we get to, it has a positive story. Obviously, they're here, they're together, their rings are on. Marc, why is this worth it to go through recovery and tell people what the heck's going on and have these conversations, deal with the emotions? Cortney, why is it worth it to go through the painstaking process of resolving these emotions and dealing with this betrayal and going through this stuff? Why don't we just want to, like, you know what, during that 9 days, day 3, I'm done, I'm out. Like, why is this worth it? Where's the positive that comes out of it? Tell me about the beauty here.
First of all, he's my best friend. And so I can't imagine doing life without him. But I think I can sum up my side of it in one word, and that's peace. If I didn't do everything I could to forgive him and strive for the marriage that we wanted, our marriage is better now than it was before. And I didn't think our marriage was bad before. But I have peace in knowing that I did everything that I could. And here where we're at. And so that's comforting. If I had given up too soon, or if I had chose to not forgive, or if I had harbored resentment, I wouldn't have that peace whether we were together or not. So,
yeah, forgiveness. I don't know that we even defined it. Letting go of anger against. I pull my children's dictionary out of my bookshelf, Craig, when I'm dealing with forgiveness in therapy. Letting go of anger against. That's got nothing to do with Marc.
No, not at all.
No.
It's nothing to do with him.
No.
Yeah. It's a powerful reality, and I love what you say with peace. That's beautiful. Marc, why is it worth it?
It's. I mean, I'll echo a lot of what Court said. She's been my best friend since we met in college. I have more fun with her than anyone else. Regardless of what we're doing. For me, it's. For me, it has a slightly different bend to it because, my therapist said, look, we don't know what's going to happen with your marriage. In fact, if you're going through recovery to try to save your marriage, you're doing it for the wrong reasons because you don't know what's going to happen with your marriage. All you can do is get yourself healthy, get yourself sober, get yourself in good groups of people that are going to encourage you. Start living the human life that God designed for you. And if your marriage comes around, great, your marriage comes around.
Two become one, but two individuals become one, right?
Yeah. Right.
If your marriage doesn't come around, you're still healthy, and you'll be okay.
And you'll still have peace.
And also peace. So, it's one of those, and that was really difficult early on because, we had to trust that advice and that counseling of, look, you need to go heal by yourself and you need to go heal by yourself. And then we'll see if you guys come back together. That was scary.
Strong and scary. It takes courage.
But if we didn't do that, we're not where we are today.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. Craig, what's your brain doing over there, man?
Man, I admire you guys. I mean, there's a lot in this story. We just talked about courage earlier on the early episode. There's lots of that. There's forgiveness, man. I'm a firm believer in forgiveness. Faith. I mean, it's and now you guys are helping other people who are struggling with some of the same issues. I think it's fantastic.
Going back to where I foreshadowed, Mark, how did you forgive Cortney? You may have thought that was a total joke, but she punched you in the arm. She gave you, she accused you of things that probably didn't even happen. Well, what about that time you looked at that woman in the restaurant and I know? I'm just making something up. But, when you're going through a messy process, I think the thing that I'm trying to point out is, right, like, there's apology and forgiveness cycles. We talked about that a little bit. We didn't have time to do it today, but that's okay, because I want to do a whole show on that sometime. This goes back and forth. We can throw this volleyball back and forth, and you're trying to deal with the emotions inside as well. Apology and forgiveness on an addict's part. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it was, I can remember things that I had to forgive Court for, but a lot of it wasn't the way I looked at. A lot of it was, well, not a lot. Some of it was self-inflicted.
Yeah, of course.
Like her punching me in the arm, I'm like, all right, I probably have to forgive you, but you know what? You probably deserved it. In fact, you probably deserve a lot more than that. So, be glad it was just one punch.
Yeah,
got off easy, right?
Yeah.
It's like, all right, if
each tooth was not pulled out individually with a pair of pliers. I get it. I know, I get it.
Like if a bruised arm is the worst thing that's going to happen through this whole recovery, you're coming out pretty well there, buddy.
But what I'm getting at is, Dave Ramsey of all people, actually, I think it was Dave Ramsey of all people, well, not of all people. I'm just saying one of the things that he talks about is, you know how he answers the question on his show, Craig? Hey, how you doing, Dave? Thanks for taking my call. And Dave, you know how Dave replies?
Better than I deserve.
Right?
Yeah. How are you doing? Better than I deserve.
That's what he says. And that is so grounded, because we all, look, human beings are flawed. She's going through a years-long process of recovering and forgiving, and she's not going to do that well. Or if the woman is the sex addict, and that happens, by the way, people, the guy's kind of going through and trying to forgive, and they're not going to do it well, perfect and right. We need grace through this process, both ways, all the way around, is what I'm really trying to get at there.
And really, I think he needed to forgive me for even before the reveal, because part of the reason he couldn't come to me is because I had put him on this pedestal thinking he was the perfect husband and could do no wrong, which put a lot of responsibility and weight on his shoulders, that he couldn't step off and say, you know what, I've messed up. So in that regard, even before all of this that I knew about, I needed forgiveness.
I need it every day, honestly. And I don't mean that as a joke, but it's something that is a beautiful thing. I know, my pastor talks about, listen, I'm just an imperfect person coming to you with a perfect message from him, and two imperfect people coming together, two imperfect individuals coming together to create something in marriage. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. That's all we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, what do you want to sum us up with? We need to text Ian, Craig. Yeah. What are you thinking, man?
I just got one more question for Mark. So, Mark, when we started this story, you said you were almost mad at God because you felt like he was doing all these cool things in Cortney's life and not yours. How has that changed since this?
It's, he's given me, he has continued to open doors that every time we walk through, he opens up bigger doors and he opens up broader doors. So, it's gone from, I'm going to talk to the youth group at our church of, 20 high school guys to, now we're doing speaking engagements that are, being recorded and put out on YouTube. We're doing podcasts that the audience is getting bigger and bigger, and we've got less and less control over it, which is a little nerve wracking. But, one story I'll share real quickly. The first year we shared at our church youth group, they were doing a series on relationships. So we came in and shared our story. And then we came into next year and shared our stories again. And after that second time, this high school kid, I want to guess he was a junior in high school. He came up to me and said, look, I just want to thank you for talking last year. He's like, I missed it. I drove here just to talk to you. Thank you for talking last year, because I was addicted last year and it took me 3 months to tell my parents after I heard you talk, but I've been sober 9 months and I wouldn't have done that if I didn't hear you talk.
That is awesome.
Yeah, love it, man.
That's
Love it.
like, all right, that's what God's doing.
That's worth it.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
and Court said, early on through our kind of recovery, as she was writing her book, she said, if this story touches just one person, it'll be worth it. And I heard that, I'm like, man, if this story doesn't touch more than one person,
Yeah.
but having one person come up, I'm like, all right, no, I take that back. Like, suddenly this was worth it.
I get what you mean now. I get what you, and you know what? You're looking at someone in the eyes and you're experiencing with it. Yeah, it's a gift, man. It's a gift. What do they say in Unbeatable Mind Coaching, Craig? Embrace the suck.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah. These are hard things to talk about. I have mad respect for you guys for bringing it out and talking about it.
Okay, you guys remember the the high five we do, right?
No.
Yeah. So it's a tradition I started on the show because of that. The courage that it takes to share. The reality of what you guys have done tonight is powerful to me, and it kind of goes back to a moment where I was having struggles as a kid. I don't think I ever told that story on this podcast, have I, Craig?
I don't recall
You
it.
don't know where that high five comes from. Yeah, I guess I kept it in my head. Anyway, to me, it just really signifies, like a connected and, congratulatory, like, thank you, like, good job, you're acceptable kind of thing. And so when I'm sitting across the table, I like to give a high five and want to count you down to 3. When we're doing Zoom, we have to do a clap. So the clap signifies, that high five reality, right? And so, because this is not easy to do, Mark, and you're right. Maybe there was one more person today that your story, Cortney, helped, and that's absolutely my goal. I share that with you. So you cool with doing a clap?
Yeah, can I do one thing first?
Oh,
Can I
absolutely.
tell people where to get my book?
Do what?
Can I tell people where to get my book?
Oh, absolutely.
everywhere.
Please,
Yeah.
please, yes.
Clay jar cracked, right?
Yes, Clay Jar Crack.
Actually, let's go a
Hey,
little
come
bit
here,
longer
Letter.
because what does clay jar cracked mean? It occurs to me that we didn't do that. It's a metaphor, right?
Come back.
Yeah, I know, right? Like, what did we do?
It's based on scripture. How we're all fragile clay jars, and we go through life and our jars crack with our experiences, our difficult experiences, but we don't have to shatter. We can be held together, and our light, God's light, can shine through the cracks as we tell our stories.
It's a super cool metaphor that and where did that come from? So can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, it's the jars of clay passage. It's 2 Corinthians 4, and I never could understand that passage. Whenever I read it, it didn't make sense to me, and I was frustrated by it. But I knew it was special. I didn't know why. And it wasn't until Mark started the reveal process that God showed me that scripture again and had me go read it in a closet on the floor. and
Wow.
at that moment, it made perfect sense. And I could see how it was the metaphor for my life, this story, and what my future was going to hold.
Yeah, it's like I said, I don't know how we didn't get that a little while ago. I mean, because I've heard a lot of titles.
Yeah.
Seen a lot of books, particularly more in the circles I'm traveling, I guess now. That's a good one, man.
Thanks. Yeah. It's
Where do they find it?
What's that, Courtney?
It's the subtitle is When We're Broken But Not Shattered.
Yeah. Like you said, Craig, where do we find it?
Obviously all your favorite bookstores and Amazon, but if you want a deal, I can give you my website address.
I want deals, man.
So it's yourvocem, yourvocem.com, and that's Latin for your voice.
Yeah, and we'll have that on the show notes. And like I said, I don't know if we said it this show or last show, but we're actually going to do, if the authors are in agreement and whatnot, links on our website, that pop it out to you. We're going to be doing some links to your book, so you can come right if you're happen to be on Through a Therapist's Eyes right now listening. You can kind of click over to the books, go and pop the purchase of those. It'll send you right through. It's good stuff are happening because Marc, you're awesome. You're totally courageous to do this. Truly, man. And Cortney, I gave you praise in what you do in your editing and your work. Dudes out there, man, ladies out there, y'all need to look these people up. She'll make your book come alive. And man, can I say, Marc, you might talk to somebody and make their life come alive. How about that?
We'll see. I'll just keep talking and we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. Somebody told me that, I was listening to a radio program. What popped in my head there was, the guy on his anniversary date of recovery from alcoholism is what it was. But he says, I was a part of the living dead and I'm alive now. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what we're doing. So thank you guys for what you've done tonight.
Thanks for having us. It was good to see you again. And
good to see you guys too. Very, very good to see you.
Greg, take us out of here, man.
Yeah, throughatherapisteyes.com is our website. You can find out more about us there. We've done some upgrades and added some new cool stuff to the site. You can find links to our social media there. And we're giving away the first chapter of Chris's book if you sign up for our email list. So if you want to get a quick preview, then be sure to get on that list. And I think that covers it, Chris. What are we going to do next?
I'm going to put you on the spot, brother. You ready for that? You asked me the question. You ready for the answer?
Be careful, man. Be careful.
Come on now. You said we need to do a show on breathing.
We'll see about that.
That is a good follow-up. So look for that.
We'll see about that.
I'll work on them, boys and girls out there. We'll see you next week.